The Origin of Species, by Charles Darwin. Introduction. Imagine a young man, just in his 20s, setting sail on a 5-year voyage around the world. He's not a hardened adventurer or a treasure hunter. He is a quiet, thoughtful naturalist named Charles Darwin. On that ship, HMS Beagle, he saw things that would change the course of human history. He saw fossils of giant, extinct creatures lying next to the bones of smaller, similar animals still alive today. On a tiny, remote chain of volcanic islands, the Galapagos, he noticed that the finches on one island had slightly different beaks than the finches on another, each perfectly suited to the food available there. These weren't just curious observations. They were clues. Clues to what Darwin called the mystery of mysteries, how the magnificent diversity of life on Earth came to be. For the next 22 years after his voyage, he worked in quiet, patient secrecy. He filled notebooks, corresponded with scientists and farmers, and studied everything from barnacles to pigeons, all to piece together a single, revolutionary idea. He was a cautious man, almost afraid of the storm his theory would unleash. But then, a letter arrived. Another naturalist, Alfred Russel Wallace, working halfway across the world, had independently discovered the very same idea. The secret was out. Spurred into action, Darwin finally published his masterpiece in 1859, On the Origin of Species. The book didn't just cause a stir, it created a lasting storm of controversy that rages to this day. It was called the theory that shook the world. Why? Because it proposed that all life, from the humblest insect to you and me, is connected. That we are all descendants of ancient, common ancestors, shaped over millions of years by a process he called natural selection. Today, we're going to journey through this monumental book. But this won't be a dry, academic lecture. We're going to uncover the story at its heart. By the end of our time together, you'll understand the simple, yet powerful engine that drives all of life on Earth. You'll see the world not as a static collection of creatures, but as a grand, unfolding story of struggle, adaptation, and survival. And you'll grasp the one idea that connects you, me, the birds in the sky, and the deepest sea creatures into a single, magnificent family tree. Book summary. So, where does a man begin when he wants to explain the entire history of life on Earth? Charles Darwin knew his idea was radical, so he started not in the wild jungles or the deep past, but somewhere much more familiar, the farm. He begins by looking at variation under domestication. Think about dogs. A tiny Chihuahua and a giant Great Dane are technically the same species. They can breed. But look at them. They are wildly different. Or think about pigeons. Darwin was fascinated by them. He joined London pigeon clubs and studied the incredible variety fanciers had bred. He describes the English carrier pigeon, with its long beak and large eyelids, the short-faced tumbler, with a beak almost like a finch's, the pouter, with its enormous, inflatable crop, the fantail, with its 30 or 40 tail feathers instead of the usual 12. He points out that if a naturalist were shown these birds for the first time and told they were wild, they would certainly be ranked as distinct species, maybe even different genera. Yet every pigeon breeder knew they all descended from a single ancestor, the common rock pigeon. How did this happen? Through a process Darwin calls selection. For generations, humans have chosen the individuals with the traits they like, the slightly longer beak, the slightly fancier tail, and have bred from them. Nature provides the variations, and man adds them up in certain directions useful to him. Sometimes this is methodical, a conscious effort to create a new breed. But more often, it's what Darwin calls unconscious selection. A man simply tries to keep his best dogs or his best horses, breeding from the strongest or fastest without any grand plan of creating a new breed. Yet, over centuries, This slow, steady process improves and modifies the breed anyway. This was Darwin's opening argument. He established a powerful truth: selection can produce immense change. With this foundation laid, he then turns his gaze from the farm to the entire world and asks a profound question: is there a similar power at work in nature? To answer that, he first needed to show that the raw material for selection, variation, also exists in the wild. In his chapter Variation Under Nature, he shows that it does. No two individuals of the same species are ever exactly identical. These small individual differences are the first steps towards varieties. He points out that it's the most widespread and common species, what he calls the dominant species, that tend to produce the most varieties. Where there is more life, there is more variation. So, we have variation in nature. But what is the selecting force? Who, or what, is the farmer in the wild? Darwin's answer to this is the cornerstone of his entire theory. He calls it the struggle for existence. It's an idea he borrowed from the economist Thomas Malthus, who had observed that human populations tend to increase faster than their food supply. Darwin applied this principle to the entire animal and vegetable kingdoms. Think about it this way: every single organism, from an elephant to a blade of grass, has the potential to reproduce at a geometric rate. Darwin calculates that even the slow-breeding elephant, if every one of its offspring survived and reproduced, would cover the earth with its descendants in less than 1,000 years. A single plant that produces only 2 seeds a year would yield 1 million plants in just 20 years. Clearly, the world is not overrun with elephants or any single plant. So what is stopping them? Destruction. As many more individuals are born than can possibly survive, there must be a constant, recurring struggle for existence. This isn't always a dramatic battle, tooth and claw. Darwin uses the term in a large and metaphorical sense. A plant on the edge of a desert struggles against the drought. A seedling struggles with other seedlings for light and soil. A species struggles against the cold of winter, against predators, against diseases. He paints a vivid picture of this unseen war. We see the face of nature bright with gladness, but we forget that the birds singing are constantly destroying insects or seeds, and that those same songbirds, their eggs, and their young are being destroyed by predators. He gives an incredible example of the complex web of life. In England, the population of red clover depends on the visits of humblebees to pollinate its flowers. The number of humblebees, however, is limited by field mice, which destroy their nests. And the number of mice is largely controlled by the number of cats. Therefore, Darwin concludes, it's quite credible that the number of cats in a district could determine the frequency of red clover. This constant struggle for life, this intricate web of dependencies, sets the stage for Darwin's central mechanism. He asks, in this universal battle, which individuals are most likely to survive? It's not random. Any being, if it vary however slightly in any manner profitable to itself, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. This is the core of it. He calls this principle natural selection, or as the philosopher Herbert Spencer later put it, the survival of the fittest. It is nature's equivalent of the breeder's hand. But it is immeasurably superior to man's feeble efforts. Man selects for his own good, nature selects only for the good of the being itself. Man acts on visible characters, nature acts on every internal organ, on every shade of constitutional difference, on the whole machinery of life. Natural selection, he writes, is daily and hourly scrutinizing, throughout the world, the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, preserving and adding up all that are good, silently and insensibly working, whenever and wherever opportunity offers, at the improvement of each organic being. This process, over vast stretches of time, has 2 profound consequences. The first is extinction. As new, improved forms arise, they inevitably take the place of the older, less improved forms. The competition is most severe between those that are most similar, varieties of the same species, or species of the same genus. So, a new variety will tend to press hardest on its own parent species, often driving it to extinction. This is why, he argues, we don't see an endless chain of intermediate forms today. The very process of forming a new species erases the steps that came before it. The second consequence is what Darwin calls the divergence of character. As descendants of a single species multiply, they will be more successful if they can seize on new and different places in the economy of nature. Imagine a carnivorous animal. If its descendants vary, some becoming slightly faster to catch deer, others developing stronger jaws for crushing bone, and others perhaps becoming less carnivorous and eating plants, they won't be competing as intensely with each other. The more diversified they become, the more life a single area can support. This explains the branching pattern of life. It's why we have groups within groups, species within genera, genera within families, families within orders. It's not a ladder, but a great branching tree. In a powerful metaphor, Darwin compares all of life to a great tree. The green and budding twigs may represent existing species, and those produced during former years may represent the long succession of extinct species. As buds give rise by growth to fresh buds, so by generation, I believe it has been with the great tree of life, which fills with its dead and broken branches the crust of the earth, and covers the surface with its ever-branching and beautiful ramifications. Now, Darwin was a deeply honest scientist, and he knew his theory had problems. He dedicates several chapters to the difficulties of the theory. The first and most obvious one is the lack of transitional fossils. If species have evolved by insensibly fine gradations, why don't we find innumerable transitional forms in the Earth's crust? His answer is simple and profound: the geological record is extremely imperfect. He compares it to a history of the world imperfectly kept, and written in a changing dialect. Of this history we possess the last volume alone. Of this volume, only here and there a short chapter has been preserved, and of each page, only here and there a few lines. Geology, he argues, doesn't reveal a finely graduated chain because it can't. The vast majority of organisms never fossilize. The conditions for forming thick, fossil-rich rock are rare, requiring slow subsidence of the sea floor. There are immense, blank intervals of time between formations. Extinction itself wipes out the intermediate links. The parent form is almost always supplanted by its more successful offspring. We shouldn't be surprised at the poverty of the record. We should be grateful we have one at all. Then there is the problem of organs of extreme perfection and complication. How could something like the human eye be formed by natural selection? Darwin himself admits, to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. But then, he methodically dismantles this apparent absurdity. Reason, he says, must conquer imagination. The key is to find numerous gradations from a simple and imperfect eye to one complex and perfect, each grade being useful to its possessor. And these gradations exist in nature today. We can start with a simple optic nerve coated with pigment that can only tell light from darkness. Then, a small depression filled with a transparent substance acts as a primitive lens, concentrating the light. By preserving and accumulating every slight modification that results in a clearer image over millions of generations, an instrument as perfect as an eagle's eye could be formed. It's not about one single, miraculous step. It's about a million tiny, useful ones. Having laid out his theory and addressed its main challenges, Darwin then marshals a vast body of evidence from all corners of natural history, showing how his theory explains facts that are utterly inexplicable on the view of independent creation. He starts with geographical distribution. Why, he asks, do the animals and plants on the Galapagos Islands, hundreds of miles from South America, bear the unmistakable stamp of the American continent? There's nothing in the climate or geology of the islands that resembles the mainland. The answer must be that the islands were colonized by migrants from America, and their descendants were then slowly modified. This explains why the inhabitants of islands are almost always related to the inhabitants of the nearest mainland. It also explains why oceanic islands lack entire classes of animals like frogs and terrestrial mammals. Frogs and their spawn are killed by saltwater, and mammals can't cross wide oceans. But bats, which can fly, are found on almost every island, often as unique, endemic species. This makes perfect sense if islands are populated by occasional colonists, but makes no sense if each species was specially created for its location. Next, he turns to morphology, the study of form. This is the unity of type. What, he asks, can be more curious than that the hand of a man, formed for grasping, that of a mole for digging, the leg of the horse, the paddle of the porpoise, and the wing of the bat, should all be constructed on the same pattern, and should include similar bones, in the same relative positions? On the theory of creation, this is just a curious fact about the plan of the Creator. On Darwin's theory, the explanation is simple. It is inheritance. All these creatures are descended from a common ancestor which had a limb built on that general pattern, and the structure has been modified for different purposes in its various descendants. Then, embryology. Why do the embryos of mammals, birds, lizards, and snakes look so incredibly similar in their early stages? Why does the embryo of a land-living mammal have gill slits like a fish? Darwin's theory offers a powerful explanation. He argues that variations tend to appear later in life and are inherited at a corresponding age. This leaves the early embryo relatively unchanged. The embryo thus becomes a picture, more or less obscured, of the progenitor. Of all the members of the same great class, the gill slits in our own embryonic development are a relic, a whisper of a distant, water-breathing ancestor. Finally, he looks at rudimentary organs. Nature is full of useless or near-useless parts. The teeth in fetal whales that never break through the gums, the wings of some beetles, sealed shut under their wing covers, the tiny, useless leg bones in some snakes. On the view of creation, these make no sense. Why create a useless part? But on the view of descent with modification, they are perfectly intelligible. They are the remnants of organs that were useful to an ancestor. They have been reduced by disuse over many generations, but are still retained through the power of inheritance. They are, he says, like the silent letters in a word, useless in the pronunciation, but which serve as a clue for its derivation. In the end, all these diverse fields of study, geology, geography, morphology, embryology, point to the same conclusion. Darwin ends his book with one of the most beautiful passages in all of science. He asks us to contemplate a tangled bank, full of different plants, singing birds, flitting insects, and crawling worms. These elaborately constructed forms, he says, so different from each other, have all been produced by a few simple laws acting around us. The struggle for life, leading to natural selection, which causes divergence of character and extinction. Thus, he concludes, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely, the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life. That, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being evolved. Commentary. Reading The Origin of Species is like looking at the world through a new lens. Suddenly, everything clicks into place. What once seemed like a random collection of creatures becomes a single, epic story stretching back billions of years. The core lesson of this book isn't just about evolution, it's about connection, time, and the relentless, creative power of gradual change. In our world today, a world that moves at lightning speed, Darwin's work is a profound reminder of the power of the slow and steady. Natural selection doesn't work in days or weeks. It works over thousands and millions of years, accumulating tiny advantages until they produce something as magnificent as the wing of an eagle or the human brain. It teaches us a deep humility. Our lives are just a blink of an eye in this immense story. It also gives us a sense of belonging. We are not separate from nature, we are a part of it, one twig on the immense tree of life, connected by the invisible threads of inheritance to every other living thing. In an age where we face unprecedented environmental challenges, Darwin's insights have never been more relevant. The struggle for existence and the complex web of relations are not abstract concepts. They are happening right now, in every ecosystem on the planet. When we remove one species, we shake the entire web in ways we can't always predict, just like removing the cats could affect the clover. Understanding the principles of evolution is crucial to understanding our responsibility as stewards of this planet. So, how can we bring these grand ideas into our own lives? Here are a few simple ways to start. First, practice seeing with Darwin's eyes. The next time you walk outside, don't just see a bird or a tree. See a survivor. See a masterpiece of adaptation sculpted by millions of years of struggle. Ask yourself, what tiny advantages did its ancestors possess that allowed it to be here today? What challenges does it face in its own struggle for existence? You will start to see the world not as a static backdrop, but as a dynamic, living drama. Second, embrace the power of slight, successive modifications in your own life. We often think that to change our lives, we need a massive, sudden transformation. Darwin's work shows us that this is not nature's way. The greatest changes come from the accumulation of tiny, consistent improvements. Whatever you want to become, a better student, a better athlete, a better person, focus on getting just 1% better each day. The long-term results of that slow, steady pressure will be more profound than any short-term, dramatic effort. And finally, appreciate the value of variation. Darwin's entire theory hinges on the idea that differences between individuals are the raw material for all progress. In a world that often pressures us to conform, remember that your unique qualities, your quirks, your different way of seeing things, these are not weaknesses. They are sources of strength and innovation. Just as in nature, it is diversity that allows life to thrive and adapt in a changing world. That was the summary of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. We've journeyed through the main arguments of this incredible book today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you explore the territory for yourself. The true magic of this book lies in following Darwin's careful, methodical train of thought, in seeing how he builds his case piece by piece, and in feeling the weight of his revolutionary conclusions settle upon you. This summary is designed to give you a guide to that journey. If any of the ideas we've explored today, the great tree of life, the unseen struggle for existence, the deep connections that bind us all, have sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning science, it's about understanding your own place in the grand, beautiful, and ever-evolving story of life. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this exploration valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that these journeys are worthwhile, and ensures you won't miss our next dive into another world-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.